Sarah Martinez adjusted her navy blue uniform for the third time as she walked through the gates of Naval Base San Diego. At 22 years old, she was fresh out of basic training, her black combat boots still pristine and her uniform creases sharp enough to cut paper. The California sun beat down mercilessly on the concrete parade ground where dozens of sailors moved with practiced efficiency, their movements speaking of years of military discipline. She clutched her orders in one sweaty palm while balancing her duffel bag on her shoulder. Assignment to the Special Operations Command had been unexpected. Sarah had enlisted as a communications specialist, expecting to spend her service managing radio equipment or computer networks. Instead, she found herself walking toward a building that housed some of the most elite warriors in the American military. The tattoo on her left shoulder blade itched under her uniform. It was fresh, barely 3 weeks old, and still tender from the healing process. Sarah had gotten it the day after graduation from boot camp, a decision that felt both rebellious and deeply personal. The intricate design depicted a phoenix rising from flames, its wings spread wide across her shoulder. Woven into the design were symbols representing her Mexican heritage, a small Aztec warrior mask and the outline of a jaguar, creatures her grandmother had told her stories about since childhood. Her grandmother, Maria Santos, had raised Sarah after her parents died in a car accident when she was 8 years old. The old woman had filled Sarah's childhood with tales of ancient warriors and strong women who fought for their people. "Mija," she would say in her weathered voice, "we carry the blood of warriors. Never forget where you come from, no matter how far you go." The tattoo artist in the shop near Camp Pendleton had worked for 6 hours to complete the piece. Sarah had sat perfectly still, thinking of her grandmother's words as the needle traced patterns across her skin. The phoenix represented her rebirth through military service, rising from the ashes of a troubled childhood in East Los Angeles. The Aztec symbols honored her heritage and the strength she drew from her ancestors. Now, walking across the naval base, she wondered if getting the tattoo had been a mistake. Military regulations were strict about visible tattoos, though hers was easily concealed under her uniform. Still, she had heard stories about how some old-school military personnel viewed body art as unprofessional or inappropriate for service members. The Special Operations Building loomed before her, a nondescript concrete structure that could have been mistaken for an office building if not for the armed guards at the entrance. Sarah presented her identification and orders to the Marine corporal at the security desk. He looked her over with the practiced eye of someone who had seen thousands of fresh recruits pass through these doors. "First assignment to Spec Ops?" he asked, his voice neutral but not unkind. "Yes, Corporal," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. He handed back her papers with a slight nod. "Third floor, room 312. Commander Walsh is expecting you." The elevator ride to the third floor felt longer than it should have. Sarah's mind raced through everything she had learned about special operations during her brief orientation. This was where Navy SEALs, Marine Force Recon, and other elite units coordinated their missions. As a communications specialist, she would be supporting these operations from behind the scenes, ensuring that critical information flowed between command and the teams in the field. The hallway on the third floor was lined with photographs of military operations from around the world. Sarah recognized some of the locations from news reports: dusty Afghan villages, Iraqi desert installations, and naval vessels cutting through gray ocean waters. Each photograph represented lives on the line, split-second decisions that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Room 312 turned out to be a large open office space filled with computer terminals and communication equipment. Several sailors worked at various stations, their fingers dancing across keyboards as they monitored radio chatter from around the globe. The constant hum of electronics filled the air, punctuated by the occasional crackle of a radio transmission. "You must be Martinez," called a voice from across the room. Sarah turned to see a woman approaching, her khaki uniform bearing the rank insignia of a petty officer first class. She was perhaps 30 years old, with auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun and intelligent green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "I'm Petty Officer Reynolds," the woman continued, extending her hand. "I'll be showing you the ropes around here." "Pleased to meet you, ma'am," Sarah replied, shaking the offered hand. Reynolds smiled. "Just call me Reynolds." We're pretty informal here when we're not in front of the brass. Come on, let me show you your station. They walked through the maze of equipment toward a bank of computers near the back of the room. Sarah noticed several other sailors glancing her way, their expressions ranging from curious to mildly skeptical. She was clearly the newcomer, and everyone knew it. You'll be working primarily on encrypted communications, Reynolds explained as they walked. We handle message traffic between command and operational units worldwide. It's detailed work, but it's critical. One wrong digit in a set of coordinates, one garbled transmission, and good people die. The weight of that responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a heavy cloak. She had known that military service involved life and death decisions, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way that basic training never had. Reynolds stopped at a workstation equipped with multiple monitors and a complex array of communication equipment. This will be your primary station. The computer is already configured with your access codes. The manual here covers basic procedures, but don't worry about memorizing everything right away. It takes time to learn all the ins and outs. As Reynolds began explaining the various systems, Sarah became aware of a group of sailors gathered around a nearby workstation. Their conversation was loud enough that she couldn't help but overhear, though she tried to focus on Reynolds' instructions. "Did you see the new girl?" one of them was saying. "Fresh out of boot camp, probably never seen real action." "Yeah, another kid playing it being military," another voice chimed in. "Give her a month before she washes out." Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her expression neutral and continued listening to Reynolds' explanation of the communication protocols. She had expected some level of skepticism from the veterans, but hearing it voiced so openly still stung. "Don't let them get to you," Reynolds said quietly, having obviously heard the comments as well. "They do that to everyone new. You'll prove yourself soon enough." The next several hours passed in a blur of system orientations and procedure briefings. Sarah learned about the various types of communications she would be handling, from routine status reports to urgent tactical updates. The work was indeed complex, requiring constant attention to detail and the ability to process multiple information streams simultaneously. As the day wore on, she began to feel more comfortable with the basic procedures, though she knew it would take weeks or months to develop the kind of instinctive expertise that Reynolds demonstrated. The older sailors seemed to anticipate communications needs before they arose, seamlessly switching between different systems and priority levels. "You're picking this up faster than most," Reynolds observed during a brief lull in activity. "Good situational awareness. That's important in this job." The compliment warmed Sarah more than she expected. After hours of feeling like an outsider, it was reassuring to receive positive feedback from someone who clearly knew what she was talking about. The group of sailors who had been making comments earlier began preparing to leave for the day. As they packed up their gear, one of them, a stocky petty officer second class named Johnson, made his way over to Sarah's station. "So, Martinez," he said, leaning against her desk with studied casualness. "What's your story? You look like you're about 12 years old." Sarah looked up from her computer screen, meeting his gaze steadily. "I'm 22, and I'm here to do my job." Johnson laughed, a sound that held no warmth. 22, huh? Well, you look like you just graduated high school. You sure you can handle the pressure here? This isn't some communications class where you get do-overs if you mess up. "I'm sure," Sarah replied, keeping her voice level despite the anger building in her chest. "We'll see," Johnson said with a shrug. "Just don't expect anyone to hold your hand when things get tough. This is the real military, not some diversity program." The comment hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had heard similar remarks throughout her life, suggestions that her achievements were somehow diminished by her gender or ethnicity. But, hearing it in this context, in what was supposed to be a professional military environment, felt particularly painful. Reynolds, who had been listening from her nearby station, stood up abruptly. "That's enough, Johnson. Why don't you head home and save the attitude adjustment for tomorrow?" Johnson raised his hands in mock surrender. "Just making conversation, Reynolds. No harm meant." As Johnson and his group left the office, Sarah felt a mixture of anger, hurt, and determination churning in her stomach. She had known that proving herself in the military would be challenging, but she hadn't expected such open hostility from her fellow sailors. "He's an idiot," Reynolds said once they were gone. "Don't let him get under your skin." Some people never got the memo that the military has changed. Sarah nodded, though the encounter had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. She thought of her grandmother's words about warrior blood and drew strength from the memory. Maria Santos had faced far worse discrimination and hostility in her life, yet had never backed down from a challenge. The tattoo on her shoulder seemed to pulse with warmth, reminding her of the phoenix rising from the flames. She had chosen that image for a reason, and she would honor what it represented. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would meet them with the same determination that had carried her through basic training and brought her to this moment. The rest of the day passed without further incident. Sarah continued learning the communication systems, gradually building confidence in her abilities. By the time her shift ended, she felt like she had at least a basic grasp of her responsibilities, though she knew there was still much to learn. As she gathered her things to leave, Reynolds approached her station one more time. "You did good today, Martinez." "Really? I know it's tough being the new person, especially when some people act like jerks. But you've got good instincts for this work. Trust in that." "Thank you," Sarah replied sincerely. "I appreciate you taking the time to train me properly." "That's what teammates do," Reynolds said with a smile. "See you tomorrow." Walking back across the base as the sun began to set, Sarah reflected on her first day. It had been challenging in ways she hadn't expected, but she had also discovered strengths she hadn't known she possessed. The work itself was fascinating, and, despite the hostile reception from some quarters, she felt a growing sense of belonging. The barracks room she had been assigned was small but adequate, with a narrow bed, a desk, and a small closet for her belongings. Sarah unpacked her duffel bag methodically, hanging her uniforms with military precision and arranging her personal items on the desk. Among these was a small framed photograph of her grandmother, taken on the day Sarah graduated from high school. Looking at her grandmother's weathered face and bright eyes, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. Maria Santos had sacrificed much to raise her granddaughter, working multiple jobs and never complaining about the burden. The least Sarah could do was honor that sacrifice by excelling in her chosen career, regardless of the obstacles she might face. She changed out of her uniform and into civilian clothes, then sat on her bed to examine the tattoo on her shoulder in the small mirror mounted on the closet door. The phoenix's wings spread across her shoulder blade, the mythical bird captured in the moment of rebirth, rising triumphant from destruction. The Aztec symbols were smaller but no less meaningful, connecting her to a heritage of strength and resilience that stretched back centuries. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, she knew. There would be more systems to learn, more procedures to master, and undoubtedly more encounters with people who questioned her place in this elite environment. But tonight, she felt ready for whatever came next. As she prepared for bed, Sarah made a silent promise to herself and to her grandmother's memory. She would not just survive in this environment, she would excel. She would prove that a young Latina woman from East Los Angeles could stand alongside anyone in the United States military. And, when the time came to show what she was truly capable of, she would be ready. 3 months had passed since Sarah Martinez first walked through the doors of the Special Operations Command Center, and the rhythm of military life had become second nature. Her alarm went off at 0500 every morning, followed by physical training, breakfast, and 8 hours of intensive communications work. The initial overwhelming complexity of the systems had given way to growing confidence and competence. Reynolds had been true to her word about Sarah's natural aptitude for the work. What had started as basic message routing had evolved into handling increasingly complex and sensitive communications. Sarah now regularly managed real-time coordination between multiple operational units, her fingers dancing across keyboards as she maintained critical information flows across different time zones and theaters of operation. The other sailors in the unit had slowly begun to accept her presence, though the process had been gradual and sometimes painful. Johnson and his closest allies remained openly skeptical of her abilities, often making comments just loud enough for her to hear about affirmative action hires and kids playing soldier. But others had begun to recognize her competence, occasionally asking for her assistance with particularly challenging communication protocols or seeking her input on technical problems. Chief Petty Officer Williams, a 20-year veteran who supervised the entire communications unit, had taken particular notice of Sarah's progress. Williams was a soft-spoken man from Alabama whose drawl belied a razor-sharp intellect and an encyclopedic knowledge of military communications systems. He had served on ships, in combat zones, and in command centers around the world, earning the respect of everyone who worked under him. Martinez, Williams had said just the week before, "You're developing into one of the most reliable operators I've got. Keep it up." The praise from Williams carried significant weight within the unit. Even Johnson had seemed momentarily taken aback by the chief's public recognition of Sarah's abilities. But, rather than softening his attitude, the praise seemed to have intensified his resentment, as if Sarah's success somehow diminished his own standing. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, Sarah arrived at her workstation to find an unusual level of activity in the communications center. Several additional personnel had been called in, and multiple systems that were normally on standby were humming with activity. Reynolds was already at her station, coordinating what appeared to be a complex multi-unit operation. "What's the situation?" Sarah asked as she logged into her systems and began her morning equipment checks. "We've got a developing hostage situation in Somalia," Reynolds explained without taking her eyes off her screens. "American aid workers were taken by a militant group yesterday. Intelligence suggests they're being held in a compound about 30 miles inland from Mogadishu." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was the kind of real-world crisis that made their training and preparation meaningful. Lives hung in the balance, and the communications work they did would directly impact the success or failure of whatever response was mounted. "SEAL Team 3 has been tasked with reconnaissance," Reynolds continued. "They're inserting tonight to gather intelligence and assess rescue options. We'll be their primary communication link back to command." The next several hours passed in intense preparation. Sarah studied maps of the operational area, familiarized herself with the specific communication protocols that would be used, and tested all backup systems to ensure redundancy in case of equipment failure. The weight of responsibility felt heavier than usual, knowing that real American lives depended on their ability to maintain reliable communications. By mid-afternoon, SEAL Team 3 had reached their staging area in Djibouti, the small African nation that served as a hub for American military operations in the region. The team commander, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, established communication with the command center to conduct final coordination and equipment checks. "Com Center, this is Trident Actual," came Hayes' voice through Sarah's headset, the signal clear despite the thousands of miles between them. "Radio check, over." "Trident Actual, this is Com Center," Sarah responded, her voice steady and professional. "I read you 5 by 5. How copy, over." "Com Center, good copy. We'll be going dark in 4 hours for infiltration. Next scheduled contact at 0300 local time for situation report." "Roger, Trident Actual. Com Center standing by." As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself thinking about the SEAL team preparing for their mission. She had never met any of them personally, but she had handled communications for several special operations units over the past months. These were elite warriors, men and women who had undergone years of the most demanding training imaginable, yet their success often depended on the reliability of the communications systems she maintained. The thought was both humbling and motivating. Sarah had grown up watching action movies where heroic special forces operators single-handedly saved the day through pure physical prowess and determination. But, working in this environment had taught her that real special operations were incredibly complex undertakings that required seamless coordination between dozens of specialists, from intelligence analysts to communications technicians to logistics coordinators. At 2000 hours, SEAL Team 3 went dark, beginning their infiltration toward the target compound. Sarah settled in for what would likely be a long night of monitoring radio frequencies and maintaining communications equipment. The command center had taken on the focused intensity that characterized high-stakes operations, with personnel speaking in hushed tones and moving with deliberate precision. Chief Williams made the rounds to each workstation, checking on his people and ensuring that all systems were operating at peak efficiency. When he reached Sarah's position, he paused to review her equipment status displays. "How are you feeling about tonight?" he asked quietly. "Ready, Chief," Sarah replied. "All systems green, backup protocols tested and confirmed." Williams nodded approvingly. "This is your first time as primary comm for a direct action mission. It's different from the routine traffic you've been handling. Stay focused, trust your training, and don't hesitate to speak up if you see anything that doesn't look right." The hours passed slowly. Sarah monitored multiple radio frequencies, tracked the team's progress through encrypted GPS updates, and maintained constant readiness to relay information between the field and higher command authorities. At 0200, she received word that the SEALs had reached their observation position and were beginning their reconnaissance of the target compound. At exactly 0300, her radio crackled to life. "Comm Center, this is Trident Actual. Situation report follows. Trident Actual, this is Comm Center. Send your traffic. Comm Center, we have eyes on target compound. Confirmed 3 hostile sentries, unknown number inside main building. 2 vehicles in courtyard, both appear operational. Hostages visible in second floor room, northeast corner. Recommend immediate action before potential relocation. Request confirmation of support assets availability." Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard as she typed Hayes' report into the system and simultaneously forwarded it to the operational command center at the Pentagon. This was the moment when months of training and preparation crystallized into life-or-death decisions. Based on the intelligence the SEAL team was providing, senior commanders would decide whether to authorize a rescue attempt. Trident Actual, Comm Center copies all. Stand by for higher guidance. The next 30 minutes were a flurry of encrypted communications as the report made its way up the chain of command. Sarah coordinated between multiple agencies, relaying questions from Pentagon planners back to the SEAL team and ensuring that all relevant parties had access to the real-time intelligence being gathered. Finally, the authorization came through. SEAL Team 3 was cleared to execute the hostage rescue operation. "Trident Actual, this is Comm Center with traffic from higher. Comm Center, this is Trident Actual. Send it. You are cleared for immediate execution of rescue operation. Support assets are standing by. Acknowledge when ready to execute." There was a brief pause before Hayes responded. "Comm Center, Trident Actual acknowledges clearance for immediate execution. Beginning final approach now." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she realized she was about to provide communications support for a live combat operation. Everything she had trained for over the past months was about to be put to the ultimate test. The rescue operation unfolded with the precision that characterized elite special operations units. Sarah maintained constant communication with Hayes, relaying his team's progress to higher command and coordinating with support assets including medical evacuation helicopters and quick reaction forces. "Comm Center, Trident Actual. Breaching main building now." Sarah's hands remained steady as she typed updates into her computer and managed multiple communication channels simultaneously. Around her, the entire command center was focused on the unfolding operation, with various specialists monitoring different aspects of the mission. "Comm Center, this is Trident Actual. Building secured, 3 hostiles down, 4 American hostages recovered alive and uninjured. Requesting immediate medical evacuation." Relief flooded through Sarah as she relayed the successful completion of the rescue operation to higher command. The months of training and preparation had paid off, and, for American lives had been saved through the coordinated efforts of dozens of military personnel. As the medical evacuation helicopters lifted off from the compound with the rescued hostages, Sarah finally allowed herself to feel the satisfaction of a job well done. She had performed flawlessly under pressure, maintaining critical communications throughout a complex and dangerous operation. Chief Williams approached her workstation as the mission wound down to its final phases. "Outstanding work tonight, Martinez," he said with genuine pride in his voice. "You handled that like a seasoned veteran." The praise meant more to Sarah than Williams could possibly know. After months of proving herself in routine operations, she had now demonstrated her ability to perform under the ultimate pressure of a live combat situation. But, even as she felt satisfaction in her professional accomplishment, Sarah was acutely aware that not everyone in the unit shared Williams' positive assessment of her performance. Johnson and several of his associates had been working at nearby stations throughout the night, and she could sense their resentment despite the successful operation. As the day shift began to arrive and the night crew prepared to hand over their responsibilities, Johnson made his way over to Sarah's station. His expression was darker than usual, as if the night's success had somehow been a personal affront to him. "Nice work, Martinez," he said, but his tone carried none of the congratulations that the words implied. "Must be nice having such an easy assignment for your first real operation." Sarah looked up from her equipment shutdown procedures, puzzled by the comment. "Easy assignment?" "Come on," Johnson continued, his voice rising slightly. "Hayes practically walked you through every step. Any idiot could have handled those communications. Don't think one lucky night makes you some kind of hotshot operator." The unfairness of the criticism stung, but Sarah kept her expression neutral. "I did my job the way I was trained to do it." "Your job?" Johnson's voice took on a mocking tone. "Your job is to sit in a comfortable chair and type messages into a computer. Real soldiers are out there putting their lives on the line while you play video games." Several other sailors had stopped their own activities to listen to the exchange. Sarah was acutely aware that this was a test of sorts, a moment when she could either stand up for herself or allow Johnson to continue undermining her credibility within the unit. Before she could respond, Reynolds stepped up beside her station. "That's enough, Johnson," she said firmly. "Martinez handled a complex operation flawlessly. Maybe instead of tearing down your teammates, you should focus on your own performance." Johnson's face flushed red with anger. "I don't need some diversity hire lecturing me about performance. I've been doing this job since before either of you showed up." The comment about diversity hire hit Sarah like a physical blow. After months of proving herself through competence and dedication, Johnson was still viewing her through the lens of racial and gender stereotypes rather than acknowledging her actual abilities. "My performance speaks for itself," Sarah said quietly, standing up from her chair to face Johnson directly. "I earned my position here the same way everyone else did." Johnson laughed harshly. "Right. Just like you earned that pretty little tattoo you think nobody knows about." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. The tattoo on her shoulder was always covered by her uniform, and she had never mentioned it to anyone in the unit. The fact that Johnson knew about it meant he had been asking questions, possibly conducting some kind of investigation into her background. "What does my tattoo have to do with anything?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just wondering what other gang affiliations you might have brought with you from East LA, Johnson replied with a cruel smile. "Nice ink, rookie." Very professional for a military communications specialist. The implication that her tattoo somehow indicated gang membership was both insulting and professionally dangerous. Sarah felt anger building in her chest, but she also recognized that how she handled this moment would define her standing within the unit for months or years to come. Before she could respond, the conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the main entrance to the command center. Several senior officers had entered, including a Navy captain whose uniform bore the distinctive insignia of the Special Operations Command. But it was the man walking beside the captain who caused the entire room to fall silent. He was clearly a Navy SEAL, though his rank was difficult to determine from across the room. What was unmistakable was the aura of authority and competence that surrounded him like an invisible force field. He moved with the controlled grace of someone who had spent years in environments where a single wrong step could mean death. His uniform was impeccable, his bearing confident without being arrogant, and his eyes held the kind of focused intensity that comes from having faced life-and-death situations and emerged victorious. As the group of officers made their way across the command center, Sarah realized with growing amazement that they were heading directly toward her section of the room. Chief Williams hastily stood at attention, and the rest of the communications personnel followed suit. "Chief Williams," the captain said as they approached, "I'd like you to meet Commander Jackson. He just flew in from Somalia with some of the rescued hostages."
Commander Jackson.
Sarah's mind raced as she realized this was likely the overall mission commander who had coordinated the rescue operation from the regional command center.
The man whose strategic decisions had made the night's success possible.
"It's an honor, sir," Williams replied. "The honor is mine, Chief," Jackson responded, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to command.
"I wanted to personally thank your people for their outstanding communications support last night.
The coordination was flawless, and that contributed directly to the successful recovery of 4 American civilians." As Jackson's eyes swept across the assembled communications personnel, they settled on Sarah with unmistakable recognition. "You must be Martinez," he said, stepping forward. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes spoke very highly of your work last night. He said you handled the communications with exceptional professionalism under pressure." Sarah felt her heart hammering in her chest as she realized this elite SEAL commander had specifically sought her out to offer personal recognition. Around her, she could sense the shocked attention of her fellow sailors, including Johnson, who seemed frozen in place.
"Thank you, sir," she managed to say. "I was just doing my job." Jackson smiled slightly.
"Doing your job exceptionally well, from what I understand. Hayes told me he felt completely confident in the communications support throughout the operation. That kind of reliability in high-stress situations is exactly what we need in special operations." The validation from such a senior and respected officer was overwhelming. Sarah had spent months fighting to prove herself worthy of respect within her own unit, and now one of the Navy's most elite commanders was publicly recognizing her competence.
But Jackson wasn't finished.
His eyes had apparently caught sight of something that made him pause, a slight change in his expression indicating that he had noticed something significant.
"Martinez," he said thoughtfully, "may I ask you a personal question?"
Sarah felt every eye in the communications center focused on her as Commander Jackson waited for her response to his request to ask a personal question. The weight of the moment seemed to press down on her shoulders like a physical force. Around her, she could sense the tension from her fellow sailors, particularly Johnson, who appeared to be holding his breath in anticipation of what might come next. "Of course, sir," Sarah replied, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Jackson's expression was thoughtful, almost contemplative, as he seemed to be studying her with the kind of attention that suggested he was seeing something others had missed. His reputation as one of the Navy's most respected special operations commanders had been built on an ability to quickly assess people and situations, to see potential where others saw only surface appearances. "That tattoo on your shoulder," he said quietly, his voice pitched so that only those closest could hear.
"Would I be correct in thinking it includes some Aztec symbolism?"
Sarah felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. The tattoo was completely concealed by her uniform, invisible to anyone who hadn't seen her without her military clothing. There was no way Commander Jackson should have known about its existence, much less its specific design elements. "Yes, sir," she replied, confusion evident in her voice.
"But, how did you?"
Jackson smiled, an expression that transformed his serious features and revealed the warmth that lay beneath his professional demeanor.
"Because I have one too.
And, unless I'm very much mistaken, yours includes a phoenix and a jaguar warrior." The revelation hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. A Navy SEAL commander, one of the elite warriors she had spent months supporting through communications operations, not only had a similar tattoo but apparently recognized the significance of the symbols she had chosen. "Sir, I don't understand," she said honestly. "My grandmother was from Guadalajara," Jackson explained, his voice taking on a softer quality as he spoke of family. "She raised me after my parents died when I was young. Every night, she would tell me stories about our ancestors, about the strength and courage that flows in our blood. When I became a SEAL, I got a tattoo to honor her memory and to remind myself where I came from, no matter how far my military career took me."
Sarah felt tears threatening to blur her vision as the implications of Jackson's words sank in.
Here was one of the most respected officers in the Special Operations Command, a man whose professional accomplishments were legendary, and he was sharing with her a deeply personal connection to the same cultural heritage that had shaped her own identity. "The Jaguar warrior represents strength and courage," Jackson continued, his eyes holding hers with unmistakable understanding.
"The phoenix represents rebirth and transformation.
and both represent the idea that we can honor our past while building our future. Around them, the communications center had fallen completely silent. Even Chief Williams seemed stunned by the unexpected turn the conversation had taken.
But it was Johnson's expression that caught Sarah's attention most forcefully.
The sailor who had spent months undermining her credibility and questioning her place in the unit now looked as if he had been struck by lightning.
"Permission to see yours, sir?"
Sarah asked, hardly believing she was making such a request of such a senior officer. Jackson nodded and began to roll up the sleeve of his left arm.
As the fabric moved aside, an intricate tattoo was revealed that took Sarah's breath away.
The design was indeed remarkably similar to her own, featuring an eagle warrior in the traditional Aztec style, its wings spread wide across Jackson's muscular forearm. Woven into the design were symbols representing various aspects of Aztec culture and military tradition.
"I got this after my first deployment to Afghanistan," Jackson explained.
"My grandmother had just passed away, and I wanted to carry something of her with me wherever my service took me." Sarah felt a profound connection to this man she had never met before today. Despite their different ranks, different ages, and different paths to military service, they shared something deeper than professional obligation. They shared a heritage, a cultural identity that had shaped both of their characters and driven both of their desires to serve something larger than themselves.
"Sir," Sarah said quietly, "my grandmother raised me too.
She told me the same stories about warriors and strength and never forgetting where we come from."
Jackson's smile grew broader. "What was her name?" "Maria Santos," Sarah replied. "Mine was Elena Rodriguez," Jackson said. "I think they would have been friends."
The moment of shared understanding between them was profound, but it was interrupted by the sound of someone clearing their throat behind them. Johnson had stepped forward, his face flushed with what appeared to be a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "Sir," Johnson said, his voice strained, "I think there may have been some misunderstanding about Martinez and her tattoo." Jackson turned to face Johnson, and Sarah could see the SEAL commander's expression shift from warmth to the kind of professional assessment that had undoubtedly served him well in combat situations. When a man like Jackson focused his attention on you, it was like being examined under a microscope.
"What kind of misunderstanding?"
Jackson asked, his voice now carrying an edge that hadn't been there moments before. Johnson seemed to realize he had walked into dangerous territory, but he was too committed to back down gracefully. "Well, sir, some of us had concerns about gang affiliations and whether that kind of artwork was appropriate for military personnel." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Jackson's expression didn't change dramatically, but there was something in his eyes that suggested Johnson had just made a serious tactical error. "Gang affiliations," Jackson repeated slowly, as if he were testing the words to see how they tasted.
"Are you suggesting that cultural symbols representing centuries of indigenous heritage are somehow equivalent to criminal gang markings?"
"No, sir, not exactly," Johnson stammered, apparently beginning to realize the magnitude of his mistake.
"It's just that in some neighborhoods, certain tattoos can indicate."
"Petty Officer Johnson," Jackson interrupted, his voice now carrying the unmistakable authority of command.
"Are you familiar with my background?"
"No, sir," Johnson replied, sweat beginning to form on his forehead. "I grew up in East Los Angeles," Jackson said, his voice deadly quiet.
"Same neighborhood as Martinez, as it happens."
"I've seen real gang tattoos, and I can assure you that cultural heritage symbols are not among them. More importantly, I've served alongside Marines and sailors from every background imaginable, and I've learned that courage and competence have nothing to do with where someone comes from or what their skin color happens to be." The rebuke was delivered with surgical precision, cutting through Johnson's prejudices with the skill of someone who had clearly dealt with such attitudes before.
But Jackson wasn't finished.
"Martinez," he continued, turning back to Sarah, "Chief Williams tells me you've been performing at the top of your unit for months.
Last night's operation confirms that assessment.
Your communications work was flawless, and Lieutenant Commander Hayes specifically requested that I pass along his personal thanks for your professionalism under pressure." Sarah felt a surge of pride at the public recognition, but she was also acutely aware that Jackson was making a point that extended far beyond her individual performance. He was using her success to challenge the assumptions and prejudices that had made her military service more difficult than it needed to be. Furthermore, Jackson continued, his attention now focused on the assembled communications personnel. I want everyone in this room to understand something clearly. The special operations community succeeds because we judge people by their abilities, not by their backgrounds. We depend on each other in life and death situations, and we can't afford the luxury of prejudice or discrimination. Chief Williams stepped forward, clearly sensing that this was a teaching moment that needed reinforcement from the unit's leadership.
Commander Jackson is absolutely right, Williams said firmly.
This unit succeeds because we work as a team, and team members support each other regardless of personal differences. Jackson nodded approvingly at Williams' statement, then returned his attention to Johnson, who now looked as if he wished he could disappear through the floor.
Petty Officer Johnson, Jackson said, I trust that any misunderstandings about Martinez's qualifications and background have been clarified?
Yes, sir, Johnson replied, his voice barely above a whisper.
Outstanding, Jackson replied.
Because I'd hate to think that any member of this unit was allowing personal bias to interfere with the mission effectiveness that we depend on in special operations. The warning was clear to everyone in the room, and Johnson nodded quickly to indicate his understanding. But Jackson wasn't quite finished with his impromptu lesson in military leadership. Martinez, he said, turning back to Sarah one final time, I want you to know that your work last night directly contributed to saving 4 American lives. That's the kind of impact that communications specialists can have when they perform at the highest level. Your grandmother would be proud. The reference to her grandmother hit Sarah with unexpected emotional force. For months, she had been fighting to prove herself worthy of respect in an environment where some people seemed determined to see her as an outsider. Now, one of the most elite officers in the U.S. military was not only recognizing her professional competence but connecting it to the cultural heritage that some had tried to use as a weapon against her.
Thank you, sir, she managed to say. That means more to me than you know. I think I have some idea, Jackson replied with understanding. The path isn't always easy for people like us in the military. But, when we succeed, we open doors for others who will follow. As Jackson prepared to leave with the other senior officers, he paused for one final comment that would be remembered by everyone present for years to come. Chief Williams, he said, I'll be recommending Martinez for accelerated advancement.
We need more communications specialists with her level of competence supporting special operations. The recommendation for accelerated advancement was a significant career boost that could advance Sarah's rank and responsibilities far ahead of the normal timeline. More importantly, it was a public statement of confidence in her abilities from one of the most respected officers in the special operations community. As the group of senior officers left the communications center, Sarah felt as if she were emerging from a dream. In the space of 30 minutes, her professional standing had been transformed from that of a junior sailor fighting for acceptance to that of a recognized performer with a direct recommendation from a SEAL commander. Around her, the other sailors began returning to their normal activities, but the atmosphere in the room had changed dramatically. The open skepticism and hostility that had characterized Johnson's approach to her had been replaced by a grudging respect that was evident in the way people now looked at her.
Reynolds approached Sarah's workstation with a broad smile on her face.
Well, she said, that was certainly interesting. In 15 years of military service, I've never seen anything quite like that. I still can't believe it happened, Sarah replied honestly. When he mentioned the tattoo, I thought I was in trouble.
I never expected.
You never expected to find out that one of the most respected officers in the Navy shares your cultural background and understands exactly what you've been going through, Reynolds finished. Sometimes the military surprises you in good ways.
Chief Williams joined them at Sarah's workstation, his expression reflecting both pride and satisfaction.
Martinez, he said, I've been in the Navy for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of talented people come and go.
What just happened here was special. Commander Jackson doesn't throw around recommendations lightly.
I'm still processing it all, Chief, Sarah admitted. Well, you'd better process it quickly, Williams replied with a grin, because I have a feeling your career just took a major turn upward. As the day progressed, word of the morning's events spread throughout the Special Operations Command. Sarah found herself receiving congratulations from personnel she had never spoken with before, and even some of Johnson's closest associates seemed to be viewing her with newfound respect. Johnson himself had disappeared shortly after Jackson's departure, and, when he returned later in the day, his demeanor towards Sarah had changed completely. The open hostility had been replaced by a grudging acknowledgement of her status within the unit, though Sarah suspected that the underlying attitudes hadn't changed as much as the behavior. But, perhaps more important than the change in how others viewed her was the change in how Sarah viewed herself. For months, she had been fighting to prove that she belonged in this elite environment, sometimes wondering if the critics might be right about her qualifications or her place in the military. Commander Jackson's recognition had done more than validate her professional performance. It had connected her individual success to a larger narrative about heritage, identity, and the diverse sources of strength that could contribute to military effectiveness. She was no longer just trying to fit into an existing mold, she was helping to expand that mold to include people like herself. That evening, as Sarah prepared for bed in her barracks room, she looked again at the photograph of her grandmother on her desk. Maria Santos' weathered face seemed to radiate pride and satisfaction, as if she somehow knew what had transpired that day. "We made it, Abuela," Sarah whispered to the photograph. "We really made it." The tattoo on her shoulder seemed to pulse with warmth as she changed into civilian clothes, the phoenix rising triumphant from flames that no longer seemed quite so threatening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but tonight, Sarah Martinez felt truly at home in the uniform she wore and the mission she served. 2 years had passed since Commander Jackson's unexpected visit to the communications center, and the trajectory of Sarah Martinez's military career had indeed taken the dramatic upward turn that Chief Williams had predicted. The accelerated advancement recommendation had led to her promotion to Petty Officer Second Class ahead of schedule, followed by selection for advanced technical training and, eventually, assignment as a senior communications coordinator for high-priority special operations. Now 24 years old, Sarah had grown into the kind of confident professional that she had once only aspired to become. Her expertise in complex communications systems was recognized throughout the Special Operations Command, and she had supported dozens of successful missions across multiple theaters of operation. The young woman who had once worried about fitting in now found herself training newer personnel and sharing the lessons she had learned through experience. The Communications Center had undergone significant changes during those 2 years. Chief Williams had been promoted and transferred to a new assignment, replaced by Senior Chief Martinez, no relation to Sarah, though they joked about the coincidence. The unit had expanded to accommodate growing operational requirements, and several of the older systems had been replaced with cutting-edge technology that pushed the boundaries of secure military communications. Johnson had also been transferred, much to the relief of many in the unit. His departure had come after a series of incidents that suggested his attitude problems extended beyond his treatment of Sarah to encompass a general inability to adapt to the changing demographics and culture of the modern military. His replacement was a young petty officer first class from Texas named Rodriguez, whose competence and positive attitude had quickly made him popular with the entire team. But the most significant change in Sarah's life had come 6 months earlier when she had been selected for commissioning as an officer. The Navy's Seaman to Admiral program had recognized her leadership potential and technical expertise, leading to her acceptance at Officer Candidate School. In just 3 months, she would begin the intensive training program that would transform her from an enlisted sailor to a commissioned officer in the United States Navy. On this particular morning in March, Sarah was conducting a training session for 3 new communications specialists who had recently joined the unit. The irony of her position was not lost on her as she watched the newest arrivals struggle with systems that had become second nature to her over the years of constant use. The key to managing multiple communication streams simultaneously, she explained to the group, is developing a systematic approach to prioritization. You need to constantly assess which messages require immediate attention and which can be processed in sequence. One of the new sailors, a young man from Ohio named Patterson, raised his hand with a question. "Petty Officer Martinez, how do you keep track of everything when things get really chaotic?" Sarah smiled, remembering asking similar questions during her own early days in the unit. Experience helps, but, more importantly, you have to trust your training and stay calm under pressure. Panic is the enemy of clear thinking, and clear thinking is what keeps people alive in this job. As she continued the training session, Sarah became aware of a commotion near the main entrance to the communications center. Several senior officers had entered, led by a Navy captain she recognized as the current Special Operations Command Communications Director. But it was the man walking beside the captain who caused Sarah's heart to skip a beat. Commander Jackson looked exactly as she remembered him, though perhaps with a few more lines around his eyes that spoke of 2 additional years of high-stakes military operations. His bearing remained confident and authoritative, and his presence still commanded the immediate attention of everyone in the room. But he was not alone. Walking beside him was a young woman in navy dress blues whose rank insignia identified her as a lieutenant junior grade. She appeared to be of Asian descent, probably in her mid-20s, and carried herself with the kind of confident professionalism that Sarah had learned to recognize in successful military officers. As the group approached the training area where Sarah was conducting her session, she quickly brought the instruction to a pause and called her students to attention. "As you were," the captain said with a wave of his hand.
Commander Jackson asked to observe some of our training operations.
Jackson's eyes found Sarah's across the room, and his face broke into the same warm smile she remembered from their previous encounter. "Petty Officer Martinez," he said, stepping forward.
"Or should I say soon-to-be Ensign Martinez? Congratulations on your selection for commissioning."
"Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, touched that he had kept track of her career progress.
"It's an honor to see you again."
"The honor is mine," Jackson replied.
"I've been following your career with great interest.
Your reputation as one of the finest communications specialists in special operations has reached all the way to Pentagon leadership circles." Sarah felt a surge of pride at the recognition, but she was also curious about the reason for Jackson's visit. In her experience, commanders at his level didn't conduct casual visits to observe routine training operations.
"Sir," she said, "may I ask what brings you to our facility today?"
Jackson's expression grew more serious, taking on the focused intensity that she remembered from their first meeting.
"Actually, I came here specifically to see you. I have a proposition that I think might interest you."
Before Sarah could respond, Jackson gestured toward the young woman who had accompanied him.
"I'd like you to meet Lieutenant Williams," he said.
"She's been working with a special program that we're expanding, and I think your background and expertise might be exactly what we need."
Lieutenant Williams stepped forward with a crisp salute, which Sarah returned automatically. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Petty Officer Martinez," Williams said.
"Commander Jackson has told me a great deal about your work." "Ma'am," Sarah replied, still uncertain about what was developing but increasingly curious. Jackson looked around the communications center, clearly assessing the security level of their current environment.
"Is there somewhere we could speak privately?" he asked.
Sarah led them to a small conference room adjacent to the main communications area, a space typically used for briefings and planning sessions. Once they were seated around the table with the door closed, Jackson's demeanor shifted to the focused professionalism that characterized his approach to serious military matters. "Sarah," he said, using her first name for the first time, "what I'm about to discuss with you is classified, but I have permission to read you into the program if you're interested in learning more." "I'm listening, sir," Sarah replied. 3 years ago, the special operations community recognized a critical gap in our capabilities, Jackson began. "We had outstanding technical specialists and we had outstanding operators, but we were lacking people who could bridge both worlds effectively. We needed individuals with deep technical expertise who also understood operational requirements and could function in high-stress environments."
Lieutenant Williams picked up the explanation. "The program that resulted from that recognition is called the Special Operations Technical Integration Initiative. It's designed to develop officers who can serve as liaisons between technical specialists and operational commanders, ensuring that our most advanced capabilities are effectively integrated into mission planning and execution." Sarah began to understand where the conversation was heading, and she felt a familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness building in her chest. "The program is highly selective," Jackson continued.
"We're looking for people with demonstrated technical expertise, proven performance under pressure, and the leadership potential to work effectively with both technical teams and operational units. Your background makes you an ideal candidate," Williams added. Your communications expertise, your experience supporting live operations, and your upcoming commission as an officer all align perfectly with what we need." Sarah felt her mind racing as she considered the implications of what they were describing. The opportunity to bridge the gap between technical specialists and operational commanders sounded both challenging and potentially transformative for her career. What would the program involve, she asked. Specialized training in advanced technical systems, operational planning, and leadership development, Jackson explained. You would spend time with different special operations units, learning how they integrate technical capabilities into their mission planning. Eventually, you would be assigned to support major operations as a technical integration officer. The training is intensive, Williams added, but, for someone with your background, it would be primarily about expanding your existing knowledge base rather than learning completely new skills. Sarah thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. From the young woman who had walked nervously through the gates of Naval Base San Diego 2 years earlier to this opportunity to serve at the highest levels of special operations, the journey had been more remarkable than she ever could have imagined. "Sir," she said to Jackson, "may I ask why you're offering this opportunity to me specifically?" Jackson's expression softened slightly, revealing the warmth that lay beneath his professional demeanor. "Because 2 years ago, I saw something in you that I recognized from my own career," he replied. "I saw someone with exceptional technical skills who was also driven by a deep sense of purpose and commitment to excellence. But, more importantly, I saw someone who understood that diversity of background and perspective makes our military stronger, not weaker." He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "The military is changing, Sarah. The challenges we face require us to draw on the talents and perspectives of all Americans, not just those who fit traditional molds. Programs like this one are part of that evolution, and we need people who can help lead the change." Sarah felt the weight of the opportunity settling on her shoulders. This was not just a career advancement, it was a chance to be part of shaping the future of special operations and to help ensure that others who came from backgrounds like hers would have pathways to success. "What's the timeline for a decision?" she asked. "We're looking to select the next group of candidates within the next month," Williams replied. "If you're interested, we could have you interviewed and processed before you begin officer candidate school." Sarah thought of her grandmother, Maria Santos, and the stories of warriors and strength that had shaped her childhood understanding of what she could become. She thought of the tattoo on her shoulder, the phoenix rising from flames, and the Aztec symbols that connected her to a heritage of courage and determination. "I'm interested," she said without hesitation. "Very interested." Jackson's face broke into a broad smile. "I was hoping you'd say that. Lieutenant Williams will coordinate the application process with you and ensure that everything is processed efficiently." As they stood to leave the conference room, Jackson paused at the door. "Sarah," he said, "I want you to know that recommending you for this program is one of the professional decisions I'm most proud of. You've proven that excellence comes from many different backgrounds, and that's a lesson the entire military needs to learn." Walking back into the main communications center, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion, as if a circle that had begun years earlier was finally closing. The young woman who had been mocked for her heritage and her tattoo was now being recruited for one of the military's most prestigious programs by the same commander who had first recognized her potential. Her 3 students were waiting patiently for her return, still eager to learn the skills that would make them effective communications specialists. But, now, as Sarah resumed her training session, she was acutely aware that she was not just teaching technical procedures, she was helping to prepare the next generation of military professionals who would continue the evolution that Jackson had described. "Where were we?" she asked the group, settling back into her instructor role. "You were explaining how to prioritize multiple communication streams," Patterson replied. "Right," Sarah said. "But, let me add something to that lesson. The most important thing to remember in this job is that we're not just processing information, we're supporting people who depend on us to help them complete their missions and return home safely." As she continued the training session, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in a computer monitor. The young woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the nervous recruit who had first walked into this facility 2 years earlier. This woman was confident, competent, and ready to take on new challenges that would test the limits of her abilities. But, most importantly, she was still connected to the heritage and values that had shaped her character. The phoenix on her shoulder might be hidden under her uniform, but its symbolism remained as relevant as ever. She had risen from the challenges of her early military service and was now prepared to soar to new heights. That evening, as Sarah sat in her quarters completing the initial paperwork for the Special Operations Technical Integration Initiative, she thought about the path that lay ahead. Officer candidate school would be demanding, and the specialized training that would follow would push her abilities in new directions. But she was ready for those challenges, strengthened by the knowledge that she had already proven herself capable of succeeding in environments where others had doubted her place. The photograph of her grandmother still sat on her desk, Maria Santos' weathered face radiating the pride and strength that had inspired Sarah throughout her journey. As she looked at the picture, Sarah could almost hear her grandmother's voice telling her the stories of ancient warriors who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious.
"We did it, Abuela," Sarah whispered to the photograph. "We really did it."
Outside her window, the lights of Naval Base San Diego stretched across the horizon, representing thousands of military personnel preparing for missions around the world. Soon, Sarah would be joining the ranks of officers who planned and coordinated those missions, bringing her unique perspective and hard-earned expertise to bear on challenges that she could not yet imagine. The girl who had been told she didn't belong was now being actively recruited to help shape the future of military operations. The tattoo that had been mocked as unprofessional was now recognized as a symbol of the diversity that made the military stronger. The heritage that some had tried to use against her had become a source of strength that would serve her well in the challenges ahead.
As she completed the last of her application forms, Sarah Martinez felt a deep sense of satisfaction and anticipation.
Her journey was far from over, but she now understood that every challenge she had faced had prepared her for the opportunities that lay ahead. She was ready to serve at the highest levels of military operations, carrying with her the lessons of her heritage and the hard-won knowledge that excellence knows no boundaries of race, gender, or background. The phoenix had indeed risen from the flames, and she was ready to soar.